Hey, folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today I'm going down to Kentucky, which, after a while being away, we've been visiting there a lot recently, and I'm kind of glad we are. So today we're going to be talking with Owen Martin. He is the master distiller at Angel's Envy in Louisville. And I got to say, I'm looking forward to this for a number of reasons, but I'm also going to put a challenge out. So before I let Owen introduce himself just a little bit, I'll say that in May 2025, he was on an episode of It's the Liquor Talking. And at the end of the interview, he came away by saying, this is one of the best podcasts I've been on in a while. So I am hoping to take up that mantle for 2026, but we'll see. So with that, Owen, welcome on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, hey, I'll dish out compliments. I'm easy, so yeah, let's get to it.
All right. So as I was telling Owen before we started, I feel like you guys know Angel's Envy if you're listening to this. You may even know Owen. You may have heard him speak about Angel's Envy, speak about his time at previous locations, Stranahan's, Rocktown. So we're going to skip the intro of Angel's Envy and some of that and go right into more about what he's doing and really the nuts and bolts of it. So I'll start off by asking, you did an interview in, I think it was June 2024. You'd become a dad right about that time.
Yep.
Um,
The,
so,
the the fall beforehand, so yeah, still pretty fresh at that point. Man, you have a better catalog of
so
the podcasts I've done than I do.
that's cool. So, you were talking about, being a distiller, being a new dad. A month after that interview was when I became a dad. So, I'll start out by asking, how's that work-life balance going for you right now?
Well, I think I'm kind of taking it year by year. It's all ebbs and flows, I guess, both in terms of parenthood and the job. So it tends to be that I get very busy from I guess you call it advocacy or PR standpoint right around Derby time and usually around September. And then other times of the year are busy because I'm doing projects. So it's all sort of timing there. And then, now that my daughter's 2 years old, um, it's like every month it's a whole new kid. So that also seems to have an element of ebb and flow, just in whatever the duties are for that month. And then just because you just said June, that I guess this will probably be the first time I say it publicly, but I got a second daughter on the way in June of this year. So I guess to your question, it'll be even more important to find work-life balance at that point.
Well, congratulations. And breaking news. Well, what are breaking news? No, sorry, that was too far.
I
So,
like it. Hey, I'm all about the dad puns, so yeah, I think you keep them coming.
all right. Um, so the first question I wanted to ask you is, it's a brief one in your history, but you did a master's degree at Harriet Watt Brewing Distilling, and again, I won't go too in depth with this, but I did want to ask. You spoke about the thesis that you did, and you said it was with the Lowland Distillery. Are you able to say what Lowland Distillery you worked with?
I usually try to play it as a pretty open book, but I have a feeling you might be the guy who actually asks questions that I'm unable to answer. It is a pretty prominent lowlands distillery. Like if you think of one, you're probably thinking of the right one, but I don't know. Given that it has a different parent company, that I would probably be allowed to speak it explicitly. That's probably the best answer I can
Fair
give.
enough. And it would be a Lowland Distillery that had significant operations at the time you were doing the masters.
Correct.
So
The hints are
it's
there.
not Rosebank.
No, we
Um,
can say that much.
it's not Rosebank. So after Harriet Watt, you come back to the States. You've got Rocktown first, previous guest of the podcast. We had him on last year.
Awesome.
And then moved on to Stranahan's, still working on getting them on the podcast, but I got to visit them last Memorial Day. And then in late 2022, you come on to Angel's Envy. And I was thinking that you pointed out on the Bourbon Show that you're the first master distiller at Angel's Envy since Lincoln Henderson passed. Rob Dietrich, who preceded you, went over to Blackened. he never held the title. Is there a reason that either the title wasn't given or that your predecessors didn't? Like there's that gap in master distiller title.
You're saying for Angel's Envy or
Yes.
for Stranahan's? Okay, yeah. Yeah, Rob was the head distiller at Stranahan's, and then I stepped into that same role with the added responsibilities of production manager in Colorado. And then, yeah, to your question, with Angel's Envy, yeah, Lincoln would have been the last one to hold it up until he passed in 2013. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know that I have the exact answer to it since I wasn't there for that essentially a decade that there was the gap. But I think if I understand right, I think it's because his son and his grandson, had such reverence for him that they felt that the title was appropriate for him and that they were still working towards it. Um, so I couldn't speak for it exactly, but that would be my guess. And then at the time that I came in, I think the obviously there's a little bit of push and pull between the original founders and the parent company, and since then the Hendersons have gone off to start their own operations all over again. So I think I was kind of brought on to I guess usher in a new era.
Yeah, I know one of the impeti for you to come on was to bring that innovation angle. And
Yeah,
coming
and I
from
think
a mainly single malt distillery, that made sense.
yeah, and I would say even past single malt. I mean, you've mentioned both Rocktown and Stranahan's, and I would say, I mean, Rocktown absolutely independent mom and pop operation, and then Stranahan's with a parent company, but considerably smaller than Angel's Envy. Both, I would say, employ a much more craft mindset in new product development, so much quicker product development than I think what Angels Envy historically had done. And I'm not saying that one way is right and one way is wrong, but since I'd cut my teeth in more, I guess the other way you can put it is like failing quickly. Like you put a project down, figure out if it works or doesn't, scale it up if it does. And so I think, yeah, that was one of the main reasons I got brought on, was to really pump some life into the innovation program and get some new products out there.
So, um, in in talking about that, one second, I'm sorry, just making a note. So, in talking about that, you joined Jack Begwadu on Hood Sommelier, and Jack was talking about brands more generally, not just about Angel's Envy, but his point was that he referenced the idea that a brand can become, it can be putting out good products, good, solid, respected products, but still become a little boring. I'll be honest, like, up front, I had the same thought about Angel's Envy for a couple of years, that it was just the really two core products, and then the either the cellar collection or the cast strength. Good products, enjoyed them, and I would have them, you know, kind of somewhat resting on the laurels, if you will. But when you were joining or thinking about joining, were you concerned about that, even with the that impetus given or the imperative to innovate?
Ooh, yeah, that's an interesting one. No, I mean my easy answer is no, but I'm trying to give you a good why to that. I think you have to understand that I had just come from Stranahan's that also had not had a whole huge amount of product development. I think Rob had launched two new SKUs in the time that I was there. So it originally was just the yellow label, and then under Rob, I think they did the Diamond Peak black label and the Sherry cask. So still a pretty slim portfolio, and then obviously Snowflake and single barrels and that sort of thing. And so I had already spent the 3 years I'd had in that role in Colorado really like creating a whole ton of new products, some of which were more behind the scenes in the events that we were doing there. Um, but I also agree. I mean, Angels Envy had really paved the way with finishing, and then came out with a bunch of different port finish products. So I had our flagship, had single barrels, had the cast strength, all based on port finish bourbon, had the rum finished rye, had done a variety of other red wine finishes. But to me, it'd almost be more concerning if it was the other way around. If it had already played in every space under the sun, then where do I have to explore? Whereas if I go to a company that has traditionally been pretty tight with its product line, that means I have all the white space in the world. And so I wasn't concerned. I mean, again, you never fully know until you get into the role. I didn't know what what leeway I would have to push, and it's turned out to be quite a bit. But yes, I saw it more as an opportunity than a potential constraint.
And this I'm setting up as a question you may not be able to answer, so please
Okay.
don't feel the pressure to. But I'm curious because of how you were brought in and why. Were you how much were you allowed to see before you got into the role to really like know what was available that might have already been some innovations like new grain bills or things like that? Or was it
Very
all
little.
after you joined?
Very little. Yeah, I mean, and that's common, right? There, anyone who's interviewing at a new company, they're not going to show you all the special stuff, because if you either don't get the job or you don't take the job, then the hand's been played. So nothing on Angels Envy or Bacardi or anybody for not doing that. I would say that's standard practice. They had hinted that there was some different fermentation, playing around with different yeast strains, playing around with different fermentation times. I remember that because that was a topic during my interviews. But yeah, I think I had done, it was like 6 or 7 rounds of interviews to get the job, and I want to say it wasn't until the fourth one that I even came to Kentucky. So so really at that point, I mean, my knowledge of the brand was probably about the same as yours. I was like, oh yeah, they have a bourbon and a rye, and I didn't even really know about the cellar lineup because they're so small at that point. And so really, I mean, I've said it probably in other interviews that you might have listened to, but it really took that fourth interview to really like the light bulbs going off. And I would say beyond me, even, I'm a big believer that it takes for anyone to come to the place that something is made, spirits, wine, beer, whatever, to really understand the product. And certainly that was true for me during the interview process.
And so that was, you're interviewing through early to mid 2022. You're now there entering your fourth year,
Yeah, it's gone
which was
fast.
surprising because yeah, like I remember when you moved over because funny enough, I don't I don't know if this was passed on to you, but like I was trying to interview Stranahan's at that time, and I think we might have even had something scheduled,
Oh
and
no,
I didn't
I
hear
ghosted
anything,
you.
and I reached out to the PR team, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" I was like, "Oh yeah, Owen's leaving.
He's
He's leaving." And
gone.
then I found out it was to Angels Envy. I was like, "God damn."
Well, hey, we
Um,
got there. We got there eventually.
we got there. We got there eventually. But anyway, so you're in your fourth year. In the first few years over interviews and such, you were pretty adamant. Like you felt more like a master blender than a master distiller.
Absolutely.
Um, and even as late as November of 2025, like just a couple months ago on spirits and distilling, you felt like you still hadn't run the stills very much. You're more telling the guys or the girls, I don't know, the staff makeup, but telling the folks to run the
Mm-hmm.
stills at this version. Do you still feel like you do more blending than distilling, despite the title?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I mean, I'll never physically run the stills here. Just I think I said that in spirits and distilling as well. Like the amount of training that it would take me to really understand not the science behind it, I know that, but physically the plant itself. There are very skilled operators whose job is to do that. My job is to kind of sit over them and interface with them on how we make products and what our practices are and that sort of thing. But I would say, I mean, I think a better answer to your question, I think I will probably continue to beat the drum of master blender, or if you've probably heard otherwise, I really love the term whiskey maker. The Compass Box is, I think, pioneered there or really pushed forward, because to me that encompasses the whole thing. But until we get some of my own grain bills out, or whiskey that I oversaw from the moment it came off the still, I don't think I'd really feel comfortable with the term master distiller, because again, nothing I've put in a bottle has been distilled under my watch. But we're getting closer every day, right? So I mean, the very first experiment I put down turned 3 years old. So nothing I'm going to put in a bottle super soon, but again, conceivably maybe a 6 or 7 year old product. I think give me another few years and I'll feel a lot more comfortable with the title. And until that point, I'll continue to emphasize that what I'm doing on all the products that are hitting the shelf is finishing and blending and using the skill sets that I've developed, both in Scotland and at the previous distilleries I've worked at.
I hear that. And I mean, that was going to be my next question. Was the I know you do prefer that whiskey maker term, from Compass Box. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Compass Box. Always have been. Uh, John Glayer, that was one of my favorite interviews I got to do.
So jealous.
He
I've
said that
never
being a
met him.
master distiller, being a master distiller means, among other things, being uncomfortable.
Sure, that's a great way to put it.
You've got to you can't just become master distiller and be like, that's it, you're done. You got to use that and push forward. Now, I know this is more hypothetical because certainly people here in the U.S. and Kentucky, et cetera, they know the term master distiller now. Even that role was not big until 15, 20 years ago, if that far.
Certainly.
But now it's like we all want to meet the master distiller and et cetera. Is there a way you think to reduce the tension between that term and whiskey maker, so that whiskey maker could be a little, because I feel the same way you do. Like there are people who are master distillers or head distillers, head blenders, whatever you would call it, who are they're really whiskey makers. They do a lot more than just distilling, just blending, etc.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the territory we're moving into. And I would say, to answer your question, I don't know that it's specifically me that'll be doing it. I think it's going to be more of an industry wide push. And I think it's already happening. I think it's the NDPs and kind of the rise of NDPs, non distilling producers, that by nature of what they're doing, they have to put the craftsmanship into blending. So, whereas, you talk about 10, 15 years ago, that term not existing in the way it does today, I would even go back to say that blending 10 to 15 years ago was still a dirty word, very much like Compass Box kind of reclaimed blended scotch and put the craftsmanship behind that. And now you see master blenders more. I mean, again, I think distiller is still the gold standard title wise that people want to see in Kentucky. But I think there's many, many businesses, Barrel Bourbon, Bardstown Bourbon, Bourbon Pursuit, you name an MDP, and they're probably going to have a blender being talking to people, right? And they're the ones that are helping push that. And I want to, and I guess for me, it'd be like me and Freddie No, I think has also started to lean into blending with Little Book and that sort of thing. So you're starting to see the big guys move into that territory or speak to it at a greater degree than they used to. So I think it's all naturally happening. I guess is the way I'd answer that.
So one of the aspects of being a master distiller, again, particularly in Kentucky, even more so in Louisville, in the Golden Triangle, the Amber Triangle, is forward facing.
Yes.
This is and you've alluded to this a little bit in past interviews, but never really got addressed. But I'd love to ask, how has the forward facing nature of this job been a shift from past positions, and were you prepared for it?
Oh, you were asking good questions. I mean, it's definitely turned up. I would just say being in Kentucky has kind of turned everything up to 11 from what I'd been doing before. But, or I guess I've said it another way. Like before, I was a whiskey maker in a beer town in Denver, and now I'm a whiskey maker in a whiskey town. So, it's just it's all the time. Even in the quietest times of year, there's still a ton of stuff going on in Louisville or Kentucky. Um, and so, kind of to the ebbs and flows conversation earlier, uh, it doesn't ebb as much as I was used to, and when it rains, it pours. We'll go with that. Like September is every single weekend, 12-hour days. I mean, it's fun, but it's big time. Um, I think I've said it where Stranahan's, in a variety of ways, was a great training ground and proving ground to then what I've taken here. And that certainly applies on the liquid side. Some of the casks that I had done R&D with on a very small scale in Colorado, I've now scaled to much larger releases here, albeit applied to bourbon and rye and more traditional Kentucky grain bills. But I think that the front facing it absolutely applies as well, right? Because before or when I first walked into Stranahan's, I was the night distiller. I'm sure you've heard that on 10 different podcasts. And so I'm not a natural public speaker, I would say, but I just had started to get reps in Colorado. So it still felt like I jumped in the deep end when I got to Kentucky, but at least I had some floaties on from having some reps doing it during my time in Denver.
Gotcha. So coming on to Angels Envy, you've said you want to be a steward of the brand. Um, have a low ego, carry on the legacy while adding your own to it. Um, to open a large question, where is that line for you between innovation and legacy?
Ooh, it probably changes every year. It's probably a moving target. I would say it. I mean, I think I've said in other settings, but anytime I'm working on a product, I do try to at least think about what Lincoln would be viewing it as. And even in the case of the ball and bond, I actually got with Wes and kind of asked for his blessing in a way, all right, because that was going to be our first ever unfinished bourbon, which would be a pretty radical departure from the history of the brand. Um, and so I think that's kind of where I'm applying it, because obviously we're going to continue to make more and more new products, and hopefully they continue to push the envelope. But again, the bottle and bond's a good example of doing things in an innovative way, but one that hadn't been done here before. And so, does it still? That's again an easy one because it didn't apply finishing, but it's like, does it embody the ethos of what I think the brand is and what I think Lincoln was trying to do with the brand? And that to me is kind of where the line is drawn, hopefully.
And that answers, to a certain extent, another question I was going to ask later, which is about the Henderson family's continued involvement. I know that, as you said, they're doing their own thing now. Angel's Envy is owned by Bacardi, but I'll ask it in a question or two to come back to it. So, this idea of being a steward, so not being, let's say, a founder, or sometimes even not being a family member of some of these distilleries, uh, complicates the stewardship. It makes it. I'm I can't stop at thinking Lord of the Rings here. Like, you're really trying to split the kingship, but just keep it going. Make it better as you can, but not lose what you're coming into. Are there people that you look to in the industry that you feel have successfully walked this line of being a steward of a brand?
Mm. Ooh, I like that one. The very first thing that popped into my mind was Michter's, right? A revival of a brand, and maybe I haven't done the research to really understand what the original embodiment was. But obviously, the brand as it is today is revered by everyone in Kentucky. I can say that much. And so, again, need to do a little bit more research into what it originally looked like. But I think that's a good way of looking at it from a brand sense of fully reviving a brand, and then I would say putting it on the top tier of what the industry has to offer.
Nice. And so there seem to be three threads here. So maintain the legacy of, let's call it, the finished bourbon, finished rye, and the annual releases. Innovate within reasonable bounds that are recognizably Angel's Envy or reasonably what you feel Lincoln would have done. And also not innovate so much that people burn out from new releases.
Yes.
So, so far, we've addressed the first one. We'll do more into the second one, but the not innovating so much that people burn out. You seem to have a good pace so far, at least, of like two-ish, maybe three releases a year, smaller. Does that seem like a sustainable, good pace so far?
Yeah, I think I've kind of level set in my own mind that if it's almost quarterly, that feels appropriate, but that of that quarterly release schedule, only maybe a couple of them are national. Obviously, we've got the distillery only series started up. We're about to do our third iteration of that later this year. So even though I would count that amongst the quarterly releases, it's only available at the distillery. So a vast majority of people aren't going to see that unless they come visit us. The cask strength's a national release for sure, as is the cellar at this point. And then usually there's some single barrel variant that goes somewhat out there. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm shooting for at this point. And I mean, we haven't even, it's I've started saying it in more and more places, but like, we're only a 15-year-old company. So like, even on the international scale of things, we haven't, Australia's doing a ton of business right now, which is awesome. But we haven't done like an Australia only release. So maybe there's an opportunity for that sort of thing. So yes, I think we can expand the amount we're making still. I think there's some wiggle room there, but I want to make sure that even if we're making a ton of things, that maybe they're positioned in different places: travel, retail, international, high end, national releases, single barrels, that sort of thing. And you're not just hitting the same consumer over and over again until they glaze over.
So to then jump back to that first line of the first thread, maintaining the legacy of finished bourbon. On Bourbon Showdown in March of last year, excuse me, you addressed kind of the what that chief complaint charge, whatever you want to call it, that had been leveled against Angel's Envy for many years was that it was great, but it was just a finished bourbon, just a finished rye. But there was a specific next level that some people took that I did not agree with, which was that by finishing, it was finishing to mask like a so-so or bad base. I don't subscribe to that, but we'll leave that as just what someone said. So you've said that each finish should highlight the base, not mask it. So, like, to me, that's what kind of made the cast strength Bottle de Monde so cool. There were a dozen reasons why that was a cool release, but for me, the biggest one was just I got to taste what Angel's Envy tastes like.
Yep.
What their bourbon tastes like.
I've said that was the most important release for us to get out to educate about finishing. The most important way for us to educate about finishing was to release an unfinished bourbon. And I think, commenting for what we do tastings wise at the distillery, that's now a part of a lot of the tastings and experiences that we offer here. And it's applied in that exact way. And it's not 100% apples to apples because that low entry proof does kind of make a different whiskey, but as a blanket statement, it does show, I think, the quality of what our own distillate is, which then helps educate on why we would put it in a wine barrel or why we would put it in a spirits barrel, double oak barrel, what have you.
Right. I mean, again, it was so cool because nobody outside the brand probably had tried the unfinished spirit. I don't even think there was no limited releases, nothing that was unfinished. So is there, we'll put aside the 103 proof for now with the cast strength, and just go unfinished. Is there enough stock and enough interest for you to do an unfinished release that shows people a side by side of what the finish does to the whiskey, just on like the regular, was it 124.7 entry proof?
Yeah, the normal entry proof.
Yeah.
I would never say never, but again, I think we'd have to run that through our heads, not just me, a whole ton of people, of does that feel like it's Angel's Envy? Because I think, on a surface level, yeah, like a normal entry proof bottle and bond or whatever, single barrel, that sort of thing. I think we could still show the quality of what we're working with, but does it feel like a unique enough proposition to be a product of ours? Would it be something Lincoln would have been interested in? Would he have been interested in it, but under a completely different label or header? So those are the type of things we got to run through our heads. I will say, again, not the apples to apples, but we have our second distillery only release out currently. And it is a second unfinished bourbon, or one of the double releases. And it's what we're calling our 2-grain bourbon, where the rye percentage is replaced with more corn. And that is at a higher proof. So I think we did 112 proof for that one. So again, not straight out of the barrel or anything, but not down at 100, and does use a normal barrel entry proof. So it toggles a different variable, which is the grain bill, but it holds the barrel entry proof the same. So maybe if you're able to try both of those, you kind of can interpolate what the standard stuff tastes like. And just to comment, we do taste on our tours. There's one of the experiences where they thief out of the unfinished bourbon barrel. And that's part of one of the tastings we do as well, where they taste unfinished 5-year-old bourbon. They taste port wine just straight up, and then they taste the final product.
Is that a newer part of the tour?
I think it may be a higher end experience. So yes, probably newer than when a lot of folks would have come through.
I ask only because I was there November of 23, and like it was still a great tour. We did the I almost wanted to call it the sacrament. That's not right. I'm Jewish. I shouldn't be using those words. It's the baptism of the white dog.
Yes, yeah.
In a squirt bottle. So we did that. I remember that. I remember the chocolate pairings with the 2 core, but not the cellar or the cast strength, and not thieving out of the barrel. So you're right. It might have just been like a higher an
Yes,
experience or something
I
else.
believe it is a more elevated tour option.
I'll have to come back and do that. Uh, with so I mean, I love the idea of being able to taste that base spirit just to get a sense of what the finishing does. But you alluded to this as well. It's recognized that that's a pretty niche market of people who might want to do that.
Right.
Most people just want to see what's the finished product. You know, how good is that? Um, there is one more. Call it a potential. You know what? I'm going to save that question for blending. Never mind. We'll come
Okay.
back to that. So, um, coming over to, or staying with the cast strength bottled and bond. So, as you said, this had a significant component of 103 proof entry barrels, excuse me. And so, based on my count, you've had 2 releases now. There must be only a handful of barrels of the original 103 proof left.
Yeah, we've well, sort of 2 in a sense that we've done, one that was distillery only and then one that was national. But I think what you didn't see is that we'd actually had done 3 different batches to keep it on the distillery shelves because it was moving so fast that first year. And then we've actually done a second national run just in December. So we're already moving, much more than 2 batches. Um, and importantly, yeah, I think maybe you're looking at the very first year, which was, oh man, it's been too long since I did the PR around this, but 2018 at some point. I know the last one we did, we've been blending. The distilling season was late summer to early fall 2019 is what we've worked with now. And now we're looking towards the spring where we'll start moving into early 2020 barrels. So again, all right around that 6-year mark. But yeah, what I think you're getting at is we've been laying down 103 entry proof consistently since 2018. Not massive amounts, but here and there. And now we've gotten really kind of dialed in on when we're laying it down and how much. Because again, we're trying to actually put it towards sales forecasts. So before it was a little bit more lay it down and see what happens. Because again, that product was never a thing, and certainly wasn't even intended on being an Angel's Envy thing until I kind of pushed for it to be. But yeah, it's just a different beast in terms of forecasting now, since it takes a variable change at the day it goes into a barrel, as opposed to just putting it into a different finishing cask, years down the line.
So I think that was something that I had either not heard or just missed in the conversations, was that this wasn't just the original, I think, 50 barrel
Nope,
batch of
we're well
barrels.
past that. Yeah.
Right. So it was still being laid down year over year.
Yeah, so we did. I can at least speak. I don't remember the exact on the December. I think it was around 100 something, 120 maybe. The August run that we did, that was the first national release, was a 375 barrel batch, significantly larger than the 29 we had started with to launch it at the distillery.
I mean, that's good news in a lot of ways, because that means it's going to be more available. I think in thinking that you only had that initial batch and maybe one more
Yeah,
barrels to work with, it was like, well, you have 50 barrels. You've used, by my count, like 44 of them.
right. To count them down. Well, I'll give you a teaser. We still, that initial batch that you're counting down, that still exists. So it hasn't been used in this last one. I'll give you that much. So um, you'll see more things coming out under that header, I think.
Look, I was really impressed by it. I loved it. I forget exactly what score it was. I just know it was above. It would have been at least a gold from me, and I just do gold and platinum because it's too many metals. There's too much confusion.
Agreed. Yep.
So just to go back one more and clarify, this is on the Bourbon Podcast and others. Like I said, this cast strength bottled and bond was the first unfinished from Angel's Envy. It was also the first distillery exclusive. Both under your supervision, if you will. How soon after you joined Angel's Envy did you feel comfortable enough to say, okay, we're going to do an unfinished bourbon?
Man, when would that have been? I think I started pushing hard for it in. I think I started pushing hard for it in May of 2023, so it was less than a year. Which I think I definitely caught some folks off guard here because they're like, "You got hired because you're the finishing guy. You're the guy who learned finishing in Scotland and applied it in Colorado." And then I'm like, "Nope, unfinished bourbon. That's what we got to do. And so, yeah, I think it took me a year of yeah. So that would have been June of 2024 that it launched at the distillery, if my timelines are right. So yeah, it took me about a year of really pushing that we needed to do it.
I like it. So in those 103 proof barrels, and this really applies to the, I guess, the first batch of when you saw it, when you came in and saw, oh, we've got these 103 proof entry,
Mm-hmm.
103 entry proof. I keep switching the words. 103 entry proof barrels. Um, what are we going to do with them? And you said you worded it as you knew the intention
Mm-hmm.
of them, but needed to understand the execution. That was the wording that you used on the Bourbon Show. I know part of this is that Lincoln had this idea, but as I said, he passed away in 2013. These barrels started getting set down in what you said, 2018.
2018. Yeah.
So it was several years between his ideation and coming to fruition,
Correct.
and there weren't really any like notes on the barrel. It was just you knew instinctively that by putting them at the lower parts of the warehouses, you gamified the humidity, kept it at a really stable, low proof, losing a little bit of proofs. The bottle, the 103 entry proof went into like a little below 100 proof in some cases, like 97, 98, necessitating a couple of barrels of the regular entry proof to get it right to that 100.00 that you marked on the hydrometer. So between Lincoln not leaving notes, but you being able to intuit the gamification, what resources did you have to bridge the gap between the intention and the execution?
A tribal knowledge, word of mouth. Yeah. So I mean, Kyle Henderson and I didn't overlap for all too long, but he's the one who kind of made known what his grandfather's intention was, and he was the one who laid it down in 2018. And then we have a handful of other folks that have been around since that era as well. And so yeah, no formal notes written, just literally data logged as low entry proof barrels or 103 entry proof barrels. And then, yeah, just the word of mouth that that was an idea that Lincoln had in his little black book, and yeah, then kind of had to roll with it because again, Kyle wasn't around for all too much longer. I think he departed in February, the February after I got hired. So then I was kind of truly on my own to figure out how to steer the ship on those sort of things.
And you said earlier when you were doing this unfinished product, you went to, I think you said you went to Wes, might have also gone to Kyle, to get the blessing to say,
Yep.
is this okay to do?
Yeah.
At this point, as you're continuing to innovate beyond just the initial, we're going to do something unfinished for a brand that's known for finishing. Even though they're no longer part of the company, do you still get input from the Hendersons to be like, was this an idea that was had? Is this kosher, if you will? Like, does this make
Yeah.
sense?
Man, kosher certification is a whole different deal. I did it in Colorado, and I do not believe we'll be able to do it here because we don't have the traceability on the wine barrels. But I'm used to taking the rabbi through monthly in Colorado. No, I mean, I would say I probably run into them. Oh man, not as often as I used to, but every few months probably. Mainly just industry events and that sort of thing. Um, no, I mean I think that goes to probably a larger philosophical idea. Like obviously there's projects I left at Stranahan's that continue to outlive me there, and same with the Hendersons. And I think that's kind of just a facet of the industry. Back to the stewardship comment from earlier, that you inherit a certain amount of things and you leave things in your wake, and then hopefully you're at a place long enough that you really get to oversee the entirety of it. Back to the distiller, blender, whiskey maker conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly some projects that predate me. Even the 2 grain being a good example of that. Not that that was purposely put down. If you've heard it in other places, that the night distiller accidentally just put corn in the rye silo, and that's how you end up with a 2 grain rather than a 3 grain. But again, like I've heard this as a quote of Lincoln's of, "Oh, if it's messed up, we'll just put it in a barrel." And I ascribe to that to some extent. You know, having worked in beer briefly, if you mess something up, it just goes down the drain. But here, if something goes wrong, you put it in a barrel and see what happens. And so yeah, like 2 grain. Again, that goes back to me saying I've been a blender of everything that's gone into a bottle since I've been here. That 2 grain was from 2019. The first bottle and bond batch was from 2018. Um, so no, I mean, I think at that point, I don't even know if the Hendersons knew where some of those projects were going to end up, and so I do feel like I have the leeway to shape them in a different direction. But the bonded was, I would say, an exception to that, since it was, again, as relayed to me, an idea of Lincoln's.
With the so that covered most of what I had on the cast strength bottled and bond. I'm really glad to hear that it's going to be an ongoing uh, release. So I want to talk about your methodology a little more. And as you've said, this is informed by your time in Scotland. It's by your time in beer, Rocktown, Stranahan's, and now a couple years at Angel's Envy. You talked for one example with David Tao about how the top floors of the Rick House and Angel's Envy act more like Colorado. The bottom floor is acting more like Scotland. So you've got the best of all three in one. Now, as I think you were saying in a recent interview, more of the operations are moving away from the downtown location to the warehouse, just because scale and feasibility,
Space, yeah, space.
space. So I don't know. Will that really affect the warehousing that much, or like, do you anticipate any changes to that environment?
Our warehouses have always been out there. I mean, since we've been producing, our warehouses have been out there. Obviously, it was sourced bourbon to kick things off. Um, but I think, let me answer it in a different way. We're always looking at that sort of thing because we have built both Rick warehouses and palletized warehouses. And Rick being the more traditional, palletized being more where we store finishing casks, but we store plenty of bourbon in there as well, and they have different effects on how bourbon matures. And so that's always a conversation of what warehouse are we building next. We actually have just built 2 rick houses in the last year and a half or so. And I'm not sure. We may do a palletized one after that, or we may just keep trucking with rick houses. So we'll have to see how it goes. And ups and downs to each style. But all of them will be stored within a certain area in the Henry County property.
Gotcha. So for the, as I said, with more scale, more product coming out, you need more space. So one of these processes that you brought over was the idea of extended marrying.
Yes.
You know, the cast strength annual release in the early years would only marry for a few weeks at most. You came on, you implemented pretty quickly a much longer, several months long marrying for these. But you would dump, blend, refill into the original cast that they were taken from. How long? Well, I guess the dump, blend, refill. How long does that process, that part of the process, take?
Uh, 2 days, a day to dump, a day to refill.
That's not too
I
bad.
mean, the physical part of it. I think behind the
Yeah.
scenes are all the iterations that lead up to the actual dump day itself, and then all the iterations that come after the fact. So there's a hell of a lot more work than 2 days. But to physically answer your question of how long does it take
Yeah.
to extract 120 barrels or so and then refill them, it's about that. Um, yeah, so I think that's a practice that I started in Colorado, and not fully purposefully. It was doing a snowflake blend, which was the most special release we did there every year, and it was 2020, and it got canceled, and I didn't have anywhere to put the liquid. I didn't want to put it into I couldn't have put it into a tank for a year, and so I put it back into the barrels, and then that so often that happens in this whiskey industry of you have to do something and then you learn from it. 2 grain being a good example of that. The whiskey barrel aged water that we cut the peated, we can talk about as well, was another example of that. So um, so it's when you encounter those sort of things that you find out something new. And in that case, I found that I really enjoyed the marrying aspect, and it was something we'd learned about in Scotland, but not something that I had actually put into practice in my time working at distilleries. And so that one was married exactly back into the barrels it came out of. So that was different apple brandy barrels, some fortified wine, some French oak, I believe. And I found out that the one that I liked the best was when I had just married it back into a plain old ex Stranahan's barrel, not a finishing barrel of any type. And there was something about just putting it back into that once used virgin oak, I guess not virgin any longer, but once used oak, that just kind of made this cohesive thing. It really like tied there was like this common thread back to what the base whiskey was, and it kind of rounded off that finishing character and really allowed it to just fully integrate in my mind. And so that's actually what I put into practice here quite a bit. So my very first year with the company, we did a double release, and we did a cask strength rye for the first time. Back to kind of our conversation of what feels natural within the company but hasn't been done before. I think that was our 12th year of cask strength bourbon, and I tried to surprise people with a cask strength rye. It was pretty small. It was I think it was a 22 barrel blend, and so I actually did marry that one into stainless for the oh man, I think that was around a 3 month marrying time. But the bourbon was about 5 times larger than that. And so I didn't, again, back to exactly what I'd encountered at Stranahan's, didn't have the means of marrying that into stainless. And so I put it back mostly into port barrels, but then some of the overflow into just our standard bourbon barrels. And again, I preferred the standard bourbon barrel to what had been married back into port. And so now for most of my projects, I'm marrying it back into some of the base barrels, that whatever the base whiskeys, bourbon, rye, whatever. And that's a fairly standard practice that we have across special releases now. And I'll say again, the intention here, or not intention, the reason why it had to happen here is because a variety of changes took place between the time I came on board or hired and came on board. The box went away from cask strengths. I've heard nothing but guff about that. That will be coming back this spring, just to get ahead of that one. But another thing that changed was it was the year before me was the last year they had handwritten proof and bottle count and everything on the labels of cask strength. And the first year I got there, the decision had already been made to pre-print the labels. So then I had people coming and knocking on my door. Man, what would that have been? Springtime after the first year I was hired. So the spring after I got hired. And they said, hey, Owen, what's the proof on cask strength this year? And I was like, wait, what? It's all still in barrels. Like, how do I know that? And so then I went back to what I had learned in Colorado of actually marrying for a year made a much better whiskey and more complex whiskey and more integrated whiskey. And so I can have my cake and eat it too on this one. I can marry and make a better whiskey, and I can get them the proof that allows the packaging team to print all the labels, and we all kind of get a win out of it. And so that's how that happened. And again, learned that I actually like marrying back into the bourbon barrel than the port barrel. And we've just kind of run with it ever since.
And it gets specifically for that release, because it's coming out in the fall, it gets the benefit of marrying over the summer.
Yes, but that has changed. So this year, we just packaged them last week, literally a week ago. We were flipping, I guess also maybe new news to a lot of consumers, we're flipping our release schedule. So our cask strength will release in the springtime, and our cellar collection will now release in the fall, starting 2026.
So
But I'll tell you, so I'm trying to work so far ahead of time because I like your comment and we're thinking on the same thread. I like the idea of marrying over a summer to get one big push into the wood and pull back. So I'm actually, we just were filling the cask strength barrels, the port barrels, like this week and next week. That will be next year's spring release. And so the plan being to finish them for the ones we're filling now, to finish them for about probably 5 or 6 months and still marry them so that they get a good chunk of the second half of summer. But what the hell? I'll give you one. Well, let's go a little deeper even. So the other thing I've done with the cask strengths is what I'm calling like our pseudo Solera. I may have talked about this on some other podcasts. I don't remember, but every time we're doing this batching and marrying, we're marrying about 120 barrels together, 120 port barrels. Our typical cask strength runs are about 100 of those barrels. So then 20 of them have been married and go into the next year. And we have this kind of continual rotation year to year that kind of mimics a Solera in a way. And so this year, the bourbon, we're not going to age state just because we don't have the stocks to do it like we did in the fall. but almost 40% of this coming release is Solera whiskey from previous years. So a pretty massive amount, which I'm proud of, and I think makes for a good story, and more importantly, makes for a really functionally rounded whiskey and layered and complex whiskey.
For sure. And I mean, you're just add to the timeline for people. So Angel's End, we founded in 2013, 2016 production starts, but the volume really starts in 2018. So volume wise, you're really in year 8, late 7, year 8.
Yeah, I mean, I still have small amounts of our first runs from 2016 and 2017, but you're 100% right. 2018 is when the volumes take off. Although a lot of that 2018 has been used, so I'd almost even treat it as 2019 is when I still have existing stock to really scale some things.
Gotcha. And yeah, I mean, one of the reason behind my question of like how long does the dump blend refill process take is since you're refilling into the same barrels, I was wondering like is there enough time for the barrels to start really drying out or changing
Nope.
much in 2 days? Probably not.
Nope, nope. So
Um,
either the port barrels or base bourbon barrels, we use barrels that were dumped within a couple days.
right. So even if you wanted to do that Australia only release, bring over some like a pair of barrels from them, it's going to be
Yeah,
more than 2 days to
yeah, that
get
one's
them
a little
over.
tough. I mean, hell, that's a whole other conversation of how you ship barrels internationally. Typical rule of thumb is they put about 4 liters of the base liquid back in it, not for flavor, but just to keep the barrel expanded and keep the wood from drying out. I can't comment on Australia because I've never received barrels from there. I am sure it is not fun or easy. But even getting barrels shipped from Europe, from Portugal, which is what we do every month, getting barrels shipped from Portugal in the middle of summer is a little dicey compared to fall, winter, spring, where I'm much more confident in the structural quality and the flavor quality of the barrels that are coming over.
So this is going to be a nerdy question, and as always, tell me if you can't answer. But when you refill into the cask to allow for that blend to marry,
Yes.
do you have a standard headspace that you leave in each? Like, do you fill them totally, or are they filled equally?
No, man, that seems to be coming up more and more. I've talked to 2 different non-distilling producers recently who I have all the reason to believe them. They are heavily advocating underfilling their finishing barrels to leave some amount of headspace. Just the way our equipment is set up, and honestly, just for the sake of efficiencies, we fill all the barrels to the brim of our finishing casks. I will say because we're trying to do these extended marrying times, extended finishing times, even naturally headspace is developing there. But it's interesting having talked to 2 different producers and now you that seems to be some common thread that people are seeing out there. Essentially, like allowing the ability to force oxidize something or do it in a way that would happen quicker than brimming a barrel and having to wait for it to naturally develop headspace.
Yeah, I mean, I was mainly wondering because the let's say you're taking that 100 cask batch to do the marrying. Um, these casks, and when you dump them, they're not going to be 100% full because just angel share and all of
Right.
that over a
Yep.
number of years. So by filling them back, you're also then going to be left over with a couple of casks that are you don't need because you're refilling to the top. And I'm trying to remember which I had on a producer recently who did the same kind of thing. They would blend and then refill. I have to look back at who that was, but yeah, they left a small amount of headspace. We're talking like they filled 50 gallons as opposed to 53, so pretty small, but just enough to, like you said, leave room for a little oxidation. I mean, I think of it this way: like if you're marrying over the summer in any kind of above 50, 55 degree heat, not as important because at that point you're doing more of the wood extraction. But if you're marrying over the winter, then that oxidation and headspace could be really important because you're not getting as much interaction with the wood.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with all that. My goal is that I'm marrying. I'm not quite there, but I'm getting there. The flip-in season kind of it was a year where I needed to resort my processes, but I'm almost at the point. I think this year I'm going to be at that point where I'm almost working 2 to 3 cast strengths ahead of time, um, both in terms of finishing and already getting ahead with marrying. And I would say just by nature of the kind of Solera process we've developed, as I said, we're almost at 40% this year. just running the numbers for next year, I think will be 20 to 25%. And so they're already, all of that liquid has already been married multiple times over, has experienced oxidation multiple times over, has experienced summers being married multiple times over. So I think you can see what I'm getting at.
Yeah, yeah. It's not quite like a. I'm thinking like an Oloroso sherry or a tawny port where you can oxidize it for however long you want. At a certain point, enough is enough. You got the chemicals you
Yeah.
want.
Well, yeah, I'll give you one on that. I mean, as a general rule of thumb, I'm much more inclined to use fortified wines that, to exactly to your point, can handle that oxidation because I've been burnt multiple times by using unfortified wines that just couldn't handle the oxidation and then end up imparting more of a funky sour flavor on the base whiskey. So, not to say I haven't made whiskeys with Pinots and Cabs and whatnot that turned out really well, but I've also experienced the other side of that. And so I tread more cautiously with those. And a lot of times I will only do some finishing on those in the cooler times of the month if I need to use them. Or, sorry, cooler times of the year.
You expounded upon this in Bourbon Lens. You were talking about like you like the PX for older whiskeys because the younger stuff, whether it's younger American whiskey or younger oak, can fight against it, overshadow it. Uh, you prefer the second fill wine for bourbon. You can usually get away with first fill for rye because it's just a stronger profile. Use the French oak and other casks multiple times if there's still life in them. That's kind of what I term the Scotch way of use the cask till it's dead and falling apart.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't take it to the Scotch extremes, but yes, I agree
yeah.
with you.
Uh, so there are a couple points here, but the first one being based on or building on what you just said. Like in a Sotheby's interview, you said you prefer finishing. If you had to choose between finishing in spirits versus fermented, so fermented being wine, unfortified wine, beer, cider, and then spirits being fortified wine and higher, you prefer the spirits because eh, the reason you gave in that interview was that you don't have to worry as much about over extraction as you do with the fermentation casks.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
keep those separate. I mean, for that comment, I would keep those separate. The fortified wines still fall under wine territory, and spirits being, again, rum, cognac, tequila, all those. I think that's what that comment referred to is that, because even a fortified wine, you got to be very careful. Like the stuff that we're starting to do that's 2 year, 3 year finished, oftentimes is second fill. Or if it is first fill, it's stuff that we are being super, super careful with for that exact reason you mentioned earlier of fighting, tannin on tannin, fighting each other. But yes, as a general blanket statement, spirit barrels, I'm not too worried with over extraction. I can't really think of ever being burnt on it other than maybe some cognac stuff that was French oak. And so it wasn't even the cognac, it was the oak variety
yeah,
that ended up over extracting. So yeah, I think that statement referred to the fact that once I put something in a spirits barrel, again, as a blanket statement, there's always exceptions, but once I put something in a spirits barrel, I am much more confident to say, like, I could come back to that 3 years from now and I'll probably be all right. I would never say that with respect to a wine, beer, cider barrel for the fermented category.
yeah, and jumping back to the Bourbon Lens interview, is you were saying you had a place in mind for each finish type in the warehouse. It's like a wine double oaking will go to a more specific place because you need to have that closer eye on them. Whereas spirits a little more lenient, and you view new oak like if you're doing a double oak sequential double oak
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that it would be on a shorter term like a wine cask.
Yes.
I'm sure other distillers are doing this kind of practice, but this is honestly the first time that I've heard someone talk about it. I mean, like I'm using this
That's
type of
good.
cask, and
I'll
yeah,
take it.
like
Yeah.
um, so um, I mean, just from your perspective, without mentioning any names, like do you agree with that kind of assumption that there are more people doing it and they just don't talk about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll go back to the NDP thing. Everybody's trying to find the new stuff out there, and everyone's playing in the finishing space, which again goes back to why I was brought on there because I don't think it was going to be okay any longer to just have a port finish bourbon and a rum finish rye and call it a day. You know, when you have so many other people chomping at the bit to find out what's new in the finishing space. So I think there's a lot of other people that are starting to talk about this. I mean, even in the past year, I can think of 3 or 4 other French oak finished bourbons, or I think they were all bourbons. Um, so I couldn't say specifically because I'm not sitting in the rooms when they're doing their product launches. But I would be shocked if other people aren't talking about this. In fact, I'll give you one. I know Danny from Bardstown is definitely talking about it because I've heard. I think with the Calvados one that he just did, he talked about storing them in different parts of his warehouses.
I'd love to know where he stored the cathedral oak in the warehouses.
Yeah, I think he may have talked about that too. It may have just been a social media post. Anyway, not for me to put
Yeah,
words in his mouth, but yes,
sure.
I know for a fact there's at least other one other person talking about it, and I'm sure that anyone who's talking about finishing, certainly in a double oak sense, is probably, I would think, mentioning it when they're starting to do their press releases and media visits and whatnot.
So that kind of question is getting into the nerdiness of people who might listen to this podcast. I say that with love, of course. Uh,
Nerdy is a
of
great
wanting
word
to,
to me. Yeah, a lot of
yeah, but like,
all the love.
yeah, like wanting to know like where. Okay, this was in this part of the warehouse because this is where it's going to succeed the best as a pairing. Um, so adding in that, I'm going to use that as a transition to educating the consumer. And this is something you've spoken about as well, but that is of I think it's of particular interest for Angels Envy because of how internationally the brand is still known and domestically, but especially internationally, because those are the only products that go out are the core bourbon, the core rye, uh, and there's a balance there too. Like you've said, internationally, because that's the perception, there's a lot more education that would have to happen to get them to do like an unfinished
Yeah,
there. Uh,
yeah. I wouldn't necessarily even say education. I think there's different educations for different markets. When was that? 2024. We were hitting a lot of international launches. I think we did Australia, Poland, Singapore, Mexico. In my experience, most of the international education is not on finishing. Where every day at the distillery, 99% of the time, we're still just educating an American consumer on what finishing is. It's still a fairly foreign concept to your average Joe in the whiskey world. Not your consumers, not your listeners, not the people I hang out with. We all kind of live in our echo chamber, but I've been shocked. I think it was a little humbling when I first got here that that's still the main point of education that we need to do. When we go international, especially towards Scotch markets, Irish whiskey markets, they already inherently just understand finishing. Balvenie double wood, Caribbean cask, Macallan's use of sherry barrels, that sort of thing. And so it's been really fun to go abroad because we use finishing as the commonality. Well, you know those brands of Scotch, of Irish whiskey? We do that too. And then we use that to kind of pivot over into what's the unique aspects of American whiskey. So it's not more education, it's just a different type of education. And I would say the difference is more that we're not as far down the road. We're 15 years down the road in the States. And so it felt like the right time to be doing the bottle and bond. Most of these international markets, I think Canada is probably the one we've been in the longest. We're just going down the road. We're a few years in. And so it's, I wouldn't even put it around education. It's just that we need to probably be out on their shelves for another decade before we really start mixing it up more. Right. Because we're still just talking about being a finished bourbon brand abroad. And so then to come in and put a bottle and bond out would almost be counterproductive to what we're trying to do there.
That makes sense. With and then in the states, you spoke about the the anti peat bias in Kentucky when it
It's
came to
true.
the peated cask. Uh, Now the peated cask uh, and the two grain, the most recent, just the real only releases, they're both more niche,
But
won't
yeah.
reach a wider audience. There we go of people just because they're distillery only, and add in most people going to Kentucky for bourbon are not going for peat, let alone for a peated rye at that. So um, it's yeah, I guess the dichotomy there, the side by side is fun for me to evaluate. Of like if you brought the peat finished rye to Scotland or Ireland, they'd probably love it.
Yep.
Be like, this
I've
is a
said it to everybody who will
great.
listen. The distillery, I mean, more conceptually, a distillery series for me is a playground to put new ideas out there. The Bottle and Bond, if it hadn't got a good reception, may have never been scaled to be a national release from there. We kind of knew we were onto something, and that for all the reasons we've talked about already on the podcast, that it was going to be popular. And so it was a way for us to kind of toy with that, get some actual great consumer feedback, and then go to market feeling confident in what we're doing. Would I scale the peated rye up to be a national release? No, and I wouldn't. I mean, I would for myself, I wouldn't mind, but knowing our audience, it doesn't feel appropriate. But nothing says that every single release we do at the distillery needs to follow that path. I've said it to everyone who will listen. I would love to just stick that thing in duty free. I want to put it exactly to what you just said. Every Scotch consumer that is just they're walking through the airport, they see it big, loud, peat and rye, like both of those words. And that my hope would be that that would get them to grab it. And then right along that with that, I want our flagship bourbon directly next to that, so that hopefully they grab the peated rye as an intro to our brand, and then they see what our flagship product has to offer as well.
And there's so many places that you could do that too. I mean, I'm talking to a lot of Nordic and Scandinavian distilleries,
Mm-hmm.
German,
Yep.
French, maybe a little bit less on the peat, but more mild peat. But all these
Yeah.
places would be very interested in a peated American whiskey because they're experimenting with their own peated expressions, and especially up north. So I can see that being the entry point. I see now and agree about what you're saying. Like, it's different education depending where you are. Here, you're educating people that peat can be delicious, or you can like
Yeah.
peat.
That was, I probably said this on another podcast, but that was, I'm always setting side goals for myself. So, triple oak side goal was to make a double oaked bourbon, but in a way that wasn't overly aggressive tannin wise. And the side goal with the peat was to at least hear a good amount of Kentucky folks say, "Well, I don't like peat, but this is decent." And I had been pretty adamant that we should only bring the 2 grain bourbon down to Kentucky Bourbon Festival, because we launched it right around that same, like I think the same weekend. Um, Miscommunication, and we actually brought a lot of the peated down as well, which I was like, oh no, they're going to skewer me. We actually sold more of the peated rye at Kentucky Bourbon Fest in Bardstown, Kentucky, than we did the 2 grain bourbon. We sold a good amount of the 2 grain as well, but in retrospect, it made sense because everybody was bringing their experimental bourbons down. Different finishes, different grain bills, different production techniques. Nobody had a peated thing. And so even though that was in a lot of people wanted nothing to do with it, the people that were more equal opportunity whiskey drinkers, they like bourbon, but they also like Scotch and Irish whiskey, were drawn to that because it was something so different than anything else that was available there. And I'll freely admit when I'm completely wrong, and I was completely wrong on that one. And I was in the best possible way. I was very pleasantly wrong on that one. So heard a lot of good feedback just that weekend alone. And yeah, I'm curious to see how long it lasts on our shelves. I think it'll make it into the spring. I don't know if it'll make it a full year on the shelf, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see. I'll be back down there in September. Hopefully, it's a little more. Well, I don't know. I might have sent someone get some more. It was delicious. I loved it, and I enjoyed sharing it. And thank you to the Angels Envy team for sharing that, and the 2 grain and the 10 year. Yeah, the 10 year, all delicious. But it's a good transition too as well. You mentioned the triple oak, and I don't believe that I've tasted this one, but um, again, it's another education point. But for the triple oak, it's 3 separate maturations that are then blended. It's not sequential.
Yes, yes, yep.
Yeah. So, I admit when I see triple oak or double oak, my initial thought is always, okay, they did sequential. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's just too much oak. Like, I'm super oak sensitive.
I'm a Scotch drinker by origin, so you're preaching to the choir on that one.
Right. I've heard you say, like, a lot of bourbons are over oaked or over finished before they even get to a secondary cask. So, I mean, let's put this hypothetical. Like, is there a better way to phrase it? Like, for this release, would it have been like Angel's Envy 3 oak as opposed to triple oak?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've heard me say it, but I didn't come up with a name. I did not have a better name. We were like, oh man, we were going down different routes, like exploring oak, and very bad names. And so when that name came out, that was, I think the commercial team suggested it. Um, I I can't be mad about it because it's eye catching, right? Some people, I think, double oaked has sort of entered the lexicon, maybe not massively, but enough in bourbon consumers that then seeing triple would catch someone's eye. I do think I 100% agree with you. It does lead the consumer to believe that they're going to get this massive tannic oak heavy thing, and really, I hope it's anything but. I think that the oak expresses itself more in the spice and complexity and sweetness, and that was the goal behind it. Um, but yeah, I mean, names and most of the names that I come up with, I think I can make a push for. That one, I was grasping at straws. Um, but I think back to what you're saying. Yeah, we did. It's not sequential at all. Um, I'm looking at something in the next couple of years that may end up being a sequential finish, but as a general rule of thumb, that's not something I pursue because what comes out of the final barrel is your final product. There is no variability. There's no way to tinker with it, and I'm by nature very much a tinkerer. So, um, with every batch of triple oak, and we can really get into this if you like, with how the seasons affect the different oak varieties, how the finishing times affect it, we basically have two different formulas for how we make that product. We have a formula for how we blend it, I would say from pretty much October to May. And then there's a completely different formula for how it's blended when it's had a full summer of maturation. It leans much more into second fills of French oak specifically, but even in Hungarian, we've done some second fills on and off with that. So, so yeah, it the way another spirits writer put it was like it's results over recipe or profile over process. Like I'll tinker with it any which way to make a consistent product. And if I were to do it sequentially, I wouldn't have the means of doing that. So every batch, they've starting to get, we've kind of found our groove, but certainly for the first 3 or 4 runs, we were pulling things up and down as needed. And every batch ended up, I mean, the French oak stayed pretty consistent, but the other ones were bouncing up and down to make sure we were absolutely consistent in what we were putting in the bottle.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying on the It's the Liquor Talking one that the batch was slightly different at first because that French oak over the summer was just so strong that it was this. I think it was second fill, but it was stronger than the first
Yep.
fill had
Yep.
been.
Yep. And I again do a lot of these education things when I go out and do different market visits to different cities, and I almost always use the tea bag analogy. It's like when you steep a bag of tea and get less flavor, and that generally holds. But as I said earlier, there's always exceptions when I make blanket statements, and the French oak one caught me certainly by surprise on that first run, and I was just happy that I had filled them on a second fill to do it because we had some first fill French oak that matured over that summer that was we're still holding now. It's good. It's just completely off profile for what we're using for that product, and I think I finally found what I want to do with it. Um, but yeah, if I hadn't done the second fills on it, I would have just had we would have had to delay the second batch.
It seems like, I mean, in the mix you've used, at least as far as I know, you've French, Hungarian, Chinkapin. So all strong. I think of those, I feel like the French is going to be the strongest, as in
Agreed.
like it's going to
Yep.
affect the whiskey the fastest.
Yep. I agree.
And so maybe, yeah, in holding it over the summer, like you just have to start teaspooning it at that point, like a very small
Yeah.
percentage.
Yeah, second fill again is the main one we've done it, but yeah, pulling that percentage down. Occasionally, we'll add one of those first fill French oaks. That's almost like the salt and pepper to that blend if we really need to just give it a little burst of spice, and that seems to have worked pretty well. Um, but yeah, it's been a really interesting project to go with, and I think we just crossed the million bottle mark on it about a year and a half into its life. So a pretty cool milestone for me to hit. Yeah, biggest project I've ever worked on in my career.
That's awesome. The I got to cut that question just for time, but I'll follow up with you separately on it. So I'm coming back to a question um, that I had put off for a little bit, which was that, and it applies to the triple oak in that when you're dealing with a multi-component blend, you told Jack again on Hood Sommelier, you don't want people to be able to necessarily taste the components. Like you want it to be the holistic approach to this. And when you're dealing with flavors like French oak and the different oaks where it can be very clear where some of the flavors are coming from, how do you approach that so that you can get as close as possible to the ideal of it's one profile, not three added together?
Yeah, well, project by project, but yeah, I'll take it with respect to triple oak since that's what we're talking about. I mean, I think it's a good talking about those oak varieties is a good way to just talk about the overall list of considerations in a whiskey maker's head. And we're not going to get to a million bottles if I pick a random oak variety from the Black Sea or something, and then, well, that was the best whiskey I've ever made. Go make 5,000 more cases, and I can't get a barrel of it. So each of those oak varieties, one of the main considerations was, is this replicable? And we get both of those oak varieties through our existing two cooperages, two cooperage suppliers. So ISC, Independent Stave Company, and Kelvin. So the Chinkopin comes from Kelvin. The first batch of Hungarian did, but now we've moved that to ISC, and ISC supplies the French and the Hungarian barrels. So from the moment we put an order in, a month later they'll show up. So we have that confidence that it's replicable, and then each of them has unique enough attributes to make a unique product. Um, but I think to actually answer your question, it's those three varieties all have. I mean, they're oak at the end of the day, so there is a through line of similar flavor attributes, sweet, caramel, that sort of thing. While then each one expresses itself differently, and so I think another product that we've done similar was 2024's cast strength bourbon. We did a blend of tawny and ruby port finished, and same would apply. I'm not looking for. I'm hoping you don't pick out like, oh, I really can get the tawny here. It's like it just to me the tawny was like a bridge in flavor between the ruby and the base bourbon since it had more of a caramelized fruit character. And so same with these three oak varieties is like French and Hungarian have a lot of similar attributes. They're very different, but like at the end of the day, they're still European oak varieties, and they still have a greater degree of spice than the American one does. But I would say the Hungarian's kind of like a very dialed down version of the French, but then has these interesting like fruit and almost like a juicy characteristic I've said in other interviews. And so it's almost like the French leads into the Hungarian. The Hungarian has more similarities to the Chinkopin, and then the Chinkopin. Oftentimes, our base bourbon barrels are also made of Chinkopin. We just don't have the traceability to say that. And so each of them kind of has a commonality that like, it'd be a little bit more difficult for me to say that if I was like, hey, this is a product that has been finished in Sauterne and peated Scotch barrels, because those are so wildly different. Not to say I couldn't make a cool product, but I don't think the same talking point would apply where I'm like, nope, you don't taste the difference. It's one cohesive thing. It's like, no, just by nature of what those are, you know what flavor you've got from what. But because of those three oak varieties being oak, and because of like the cast strengths both being two varieties of port, that's what I'm saying. Like where I'm really trying to find those common threads that tie it all together, and I think it allows me to do that.
I mean, I can see that. And I'm thinking this question as someone who writes reviews and tasting notes is like, I remember the 2024, and I got to say this before you and since you've joined the annual cast strength releases, I have never felt that one was a bad release. There are some that to me like rise above the rest, but overall, like I know it's going to be a solid product going through. But I remember in the 24 that I think that was the first time that you used both types of wort. It had all been Ruby before that, right?
Yep.
So, Tawny's going to be a totally different flavor. And but it's weird because I like both of them and I can see both of them being used correctly, if you will, or to my profiles, maybe a better way to put it. So when I approach this, I'm looking at it as I want to pull out the tasting notes from each. I want to say like, okay, I'm getting this red, ripe fruitiness from the ruby, but this kind of dark, dried, a little spicier from the tawny. I know you're someone who does read reviews, does sometimes dive into the Reddit forums. God help you.
Self-flagellation. That's what it is
So,
sometimes.
so like when you see someone pulling out those notes, do you look at it as, okay, this is still like a positive overall review and good feedback, or oh, it's kind of like not what I was aiming for because they can still pull out the separate notes?
No, 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 no. Hell, just somebody reviewing a release I've made and diving into the details in that way is always going to be a positive. And I think that is human nature to some degree of like what we want to do. We want to human nature for someone who's a nerd of what they're imbibing or eating, right? You want to pull things out. I was just at a Tartan House, the Scotch bar down the street from our distillery, and they do a break even bottle every month, and they had done Brookladdy Black Art, which you don't know what's in it. And what are we doing? We're sitting there talking to the bartender, like, well, I think there might be some port. I think there might be some PX, or maybe it's Oloroso, right? So even I'm a victim of doing what I'm saying I don't want to be done. So no. If going way back, if someone is having fun drinking what I've made and having a conversation either about it or independent to it, but they're enjoying themselves, then I've done my job. I'm not going to read it and say, damn it, they're looking for the tawny notes. Why? How dare they? No, that's not the point. I think I can kind of hold both ideas simultaneously. Where, like, if I've made a whiskey well, I think maybe what I was trying to get across with that quote is that the flavors are so integrated that maybe you have a harder time picking them apart. Or I've been so intentional with the base whiskey and the different finishing casks that I've used that I've done that. But no, it's never a bad thing for someone to go rooting around and exploring in your whiskey, trying to find the root of what the flavors are. That just means they care. So that's a good thing.
Love it. So again, I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to plug a few things that we didn't get to talk about, but I want people to learn about. So if you want to hear more about the water project, I encourage people to go over to listen to Embellish Pod. Owen, his episode came out in October of 25. He and John went into detail about that. John was at the event, I think, that it came out at. So it was just a super interesting product. And, I wish we had the time to go more into it. But just briefly, you said at the end of that conversation, like you wanted to use that project again, weren't quite sure. Like it's only been a couple of months since that conversation, but I'm curious, any further thoughts since then, or has it kind of been backburnered?
It's both. It's on the back burner for sure. I tried to lay down a couple more just to see how replicable it was, or if I truly had just had a magic moment with that. Again, we won't spend too many minutes right now talking about it if folks just want to go over to the embellish one. But yeah, go back to kind of what we were talking about with the oak varieties of, okay, did I just strike gold, or is this something that I can continue to do? Because if I can continue to do it, then I can scale it potentially. So that's kind of where we're sort of in a holding pattern right now. But it's not. I have 5 gallons of it. I can see right now. It's in the corner of my office. And
No
my
more
hope
getting
is
lost, or maybe thinking it's going to Scotland or something.
no. Those were the barrels. Thankfully, that didn't have that happen. But no. I don't know how long from now it'll rear its head again, but the 5 gallons in the corner aren't going to be the last of that exist.
So another one was there was another project you were doing. You mentioned it on, I hope I pronounce this right, Hospopreneurs, talking about
Man, you went
experimenting with.
deep.
Yeah,
That was an Australian podcast.
I mean, they do speak English. That
That's
wasn't
true.
some
That's
some of
true.
these that I've been doing. They're speaking German, they're speaking Finnish, and I'm like, I got nothing here. Like I
Yeah.
can't even.
Fair point.
But
Fair point.
you're talking about taking sulfur bourbon, entering into new barrels, and you were gonna. This was in February 25. So you said you were going to try to present that data later in the year. I'm just curious if that project is complete yet, or
Uh, Funny you say that. Ongoing. We're still back into bourbon barrels and seeing what's happening. I think that's one where I've had trouble getting the data to back up the sensory. So I've had success with it in terms of running it through a sensory panel and people not being able to pick up sulfur any longer. And in fact, I've used those barrels in cast drinks and other projects because the base whiskey was really good. But I haven't been able to get, so GC, if you're familiar with that, a gas chromatograph, I haven't been able to actually find the data to find like an appreciable lowering in compounds. We did a one off in our lab and it looked that way. But when we've sent them to third parties, I haven't been able to replicate that. And without that, I don't feel comfortable presenting it in like a formal space. So another one that is on the back burner that I continue to use. I have some barrels in the very top of our rick house right now from the 10-year-old project this past fall that had some sulfur to them that I'm cleaning up right now that I may use in 2027 cast strength now. Back to the pseudo Solera conversation. But I don't. My hope was to present that at the Beam conference that University of Kentucky does every March, and it'll at least be another year past this one can do that. Maybe longer, but um, those are kind of the fun pet projects where I think can get really tech geeky with. But again, if I can't find sound data, I'm not going to pretend like it's worth presenting.
I hear you, and I'll just say quickly. I know Mike Swanson at Far North Spirits did the whole Seed Vault and the rye varietal trials. I remember him saying in a couple of interviews that he basically did the opposite. Like he wanted to do the sensory only because he knew he could go through the GCMS, but the GCMS was going to pick up compounds and things that the human nose
Yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah.
So he was, for his purposes, it was better off going strictly human
And,
sensory.
and I think he was at least part of a presentation. I think Michigan State, one of their
Yeah,
professors did, and it was an amazing presentation.
yeah,
I'm just the type that wants to have every single thing lined up and ready to go. So I, I'm at least comfortable saying that that is something we continue to do at the distillery and with success to the point where we can use them in other batches. It's just if I'm going to bring that to the table of the whole industry, then it's got to be airtight.
I hear you. All right. So, last question for you is: have you made any progress towards having that drink with John Glazer?
No, no. I mean, even you saying that earlier, I got a little jealous. So, who was through a writer named Robin Robinson? If you're familiar, he was through, or he's teaching at Moonshine U, I think. And so him and I grabbed dinner. When was that? A week or two ago. And his past is working as I think one of the first, if not the first, ambassador to Compass Box in the states. So, so Glazer's been a topic of conversation lately. So I don't know. It sounds like he's doing some stuff post Compass Box, but I figure the opportunity will present itself eventually.
And Robin's good. I just saw him like 2 weeks ago at an Isle of Harris event. So,
Oh,
and
amazing.
he was a recent guest on the podcast for his new book. So, because he's in New York, or well, he's in Jersey, so I won't hold that against him. But we see each other often in those
This
events.
was, don't tell him I had to prop my computer up ever so slightly to get a better angle to talk with you, but it was propped on his book right here.
That's fine. If I know him, I mean, he's the showman, he's the salesman on his own accord. He would
Very
say,
much so.
"Look,
Yeah.
the interview was built upon that book." Is how
There
he
you
would put
go.
it. So
Perfect.
love it. So Owen, thank you so much for coming on, talking about Angels Envy, talking about the innovation you've been doing here, the nerdy stuff, the broader stuff, and your own methodology. I hope really enjoyed this conversation, um, and I look forward to visiting in September for sure. I should be down there for the KBF. Hang out with
Amazing.
me for just a minute after we hit the stop button. Awesome. Thank you everyone for listening. It's been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Like, rate, and subscribe wherever you listen. Make sure to follow on Facebook, Instagram, and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Well,
See
I
you all
just got to
next week.
say, best podcast of 2026 so far.
There we
But
go.
now we bet. Hey, I know there's some you didn't get to, so let's pencil one in for like December, and that way we can bookend it and make sure that you close the year with that title as well.
I like it. I like it. We can make that happen. Cheers, everybody. See you next week.
Cheers.